Welcome to the Joy of Connecting, where modern professionals share stories of meaningful connection and how it can increase business success, unlock career growth, and create personal happiness. If you like what you hear today, get even more by following the Joy of Connecting on LinkedIn and subscribing to our newsletter that features tips from experts on how to network and connect with more meaning. Welcome back to the Joy of Connecting, everyone. One of the things that always brings me the most joy in connecting is when I'm having a really long, hard day at work and then I look at my calendar and I get to connect with someone awesome. And guess what? You're listening to that right now. I'm really excited to welcome Alli Kushner to the podcast today. She is Global Operations Team Lead at LinkedIn, but what we're especially excited to talk about today is I'm going to see what you want to call it, a side hustle, but her startup on the side is called Beacon. And it's all around connecting, specifically the incredibly difficult thing of connecting parents who are looking for play dates for their children and making that magical and helpful and awesome. So can you tell I'm excited about it? Welcome to the show, Alli.
Thank you so much. There was nothing left to talk about. That was perfect. I think we just put a pin in it and beautiful, put it out there in the world.
Yeah. And how many times do you come on a podcast and somebody says, yeah, she works at LinkedIn. But what I really want to talk about is, no, you do amazing work at the B2B Institute at LinkedIn, which is kind of their marketing think tank. But I'll start with a question I ask most of my guests at the beginning, which is, what do you do for work, but who are you passionate about helping? I think that's what I'm always more interested in hearing about.
So I love starting with the why. So my why is I want to help parents, all kinds of parents, anyone who identifies as a caregiver, but specifically where I find myself as a working parent. Work can be defined in so many different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be a typical 9-to-5 job. You don't need to be paid for your work, but we all work in various capacities. So I really view it as my mission is to help working parents connect.
I love that broader definition of work and the broader definition of parenting too, right? Like, I think it's those similar needs. Tell us a bit about the needs for connection for that particular group. What have you seen or found as far as, the parent connections and maybe why it's so important?
So the way that I really like to describe this is imagine a Venn diagram. You have 3 circles. And as an adult, it's super hard to find your people. A lot of people, they have their friends starting out from when they're in grade school or elementary school or high school. My husband is in that category. Me, I was not as lucky in that camp. And as an adult, it's hard to find friends, genuine connections, not just, oh yeah, let's grab a coffee or see you every now and then, but those deep, meaningful connections, people you want to spend time with. And now going back to the 3 circles of the Venn diagram, when you become a parent, it's now just not about you. It's about your kids. And so we talk a lot about the mental load and the logistical scheduling, and there are only 24 hours in a day. I've tried to change that. I don't know what complaint department to write to about it, but as I'm told, it's 24 hours in a day. That's all we have. So as a parent, you're looking at, okay, I need to find play dates for my kid because that's good for their development, their social needs, etc. So I need kids who are roughly their age and are available when we're available. That's one circle. The other one is they need to be geographically convenient. So I'm not going to travel to Alaska. I mean, it is on my vision board, as I told you, to come visit.
I mean, why not?
But their best friend cannot be in Anchorage. It's not going to fly with my budget or time constraints. So geographically convenient, plus or minus however many miles it is from me. And then that third circle that is really overlooked for parents and caregivers is that you have stuff in common with their caregivers. I can go to any random playground, sit down for an hour and talk to some other caregiver about what their kid's eating, their favorite activities, bodily functions, how they slept last night. That doesn't necessarily give me joy. It's part of my identity. I am a caregiver, but it's not all of my identity. So when we look at those 3 circles of geographically convenient, kids who are around the same age as your kids, they're available when you're available, and their caregivers are people you want to interact with. You have something deeper to connect with them over. That itty bitty little overlap among those 3 circles, that's the trifecta. That's the triple threat parent friendship, caregiver friendship that we're all chasing. And that is ultimately what Beacon is looking to solve. We're looking to help lighten the load in logistical scheduling, but also helping you find your people. And not just online, but getting you out into the real world for those play dates, as we're calling them.
Yeah. I almost, in my mind, I'm almost flipping it the other way and thinking, you go through all of the, even if you're, if as a standalone individual, you go through all the challenge of finding other people you want to talk to, other people you want to hang out. Now put that other Venn diagram circle on top of it and say, okay, now pretend you also have little humans that also need to get, and you
Exactly.
have to find time to meet in person. It's no longer just Zoom until we die kind of mentality when it's little formative beings that you need to get in person and, playing in the mud and all of that.
Exactly.
What a challenge. So you have learned a lot about connection. You've seen a lot of stories. You came today kind of prepared with a story or two. Is there a story you'd like to share with us that kind of illustrates connection and what it can do and what you've seen it do for people?
Absolutely. So I would say for me, I'm just going to talk about my own connection. And part of the origin story of Beacon is that I went through postpartum depression with both of my children. And in part of that, and part of my healing and my journey to becoming a parent and to stepping into that role, I went through an intensive outpatient treatment at a facility. And that's really where I stepped into this idea of connection, that we don't need to be alone in whatever area of life that you're navigating, whether it's your career, personal life, as a caregiver, whatever the situation is, that whatever that landscape looks like, that connection is really the fiber that binds us all together. So for me, having to go through that very difficult time in my life, and I went in 5 days a week for roughly, I think, 12 weeks to this program, and it was 5 hours a day, and I sat around with a group of birthing parents and connected with them on this very deep level. I couldn't tell you what any of their last names were, but I could tell you some of their very, deep, I won't, but I could go into that very deep, meaningful connections of fears, of hopes, of joys, of all of these things. And that's really where, for me, this aha moment was of how meaningful and how invigorating connection can be.
And so often you're not, it's a new topic for the podcast, but that idea of some form of trauma leading to that realization, leading to the, frankly, the must-have need for connection. I think a lot of us kind of fall through life and maybe we're not being our best and whatever, and we see it as a nice to have. But when you hit those moments of trauma, it can be a must have to get back out. It's fascinating to hear that that's where it came from. How long between, I'm just personally curious, how long between going through that yourself and then as like a tech person and a marketing thinker, were you like, I'm building a damn app. Like, I'm going to put this, what was that journey
So
like?
that's a whole other conversation. But essentially, in coming out of the fog of my first postpartum experience, I had the idea for Beacon. But I was also dealing with this tremendous imposter syndrome of, who am I to do this? Like, yes, I
Yes.
work in tech, but I am not a tech person. I don't have a background in any of the stuff really that I'm doing. I've really flexed and learned on the go. But the idea was very much percolating 2.5 years ago. And then I went back to my life, my regularly scheduled programs, and poof, got pregnant again. Went through I had deja vu. I went through perinatal and postpartum depression again. And it was at the end of that experience when I was getting ready to go back to work. I was finishing up my maternity leave. And I was like, I'm just going to do the damn thing. Like, what's the worst that happens? And it took a lot of putting it on the back burner, the soul searching, and I had to get to the age that I was ready, so to speak, that the maturity level of, okay, imposter syndrome, all right, we're just going to kick that to the curb, and what's the worst that can happen? And I also find that with connecting, it's also the same thing, that often that we're afraid to have these deeper conversations or these connections or attempting to connect because of the fear of rejection, because of the fear that I'm not good enough, or why would this person want to talk to me? And it's all very interconnected.
That a question I'm going to ask you next is kind of about what's one piece of advice you might pass on given your experience here. But I think even what you just said in itself is a bit of advice, which is maybe it's not even the advice, but it's that recognition of sometimes connection is held off by our own perceptions of I'm not worthy, or, if we take it to like the LinkedIn world, I can't reach out to that person. They're too busy. I'm not worth their time, right? Like putting yourself out there, or we talk a lot about giving value as the first side of connection. You say, yeah, who am I to tell someone something interesting that they would, or who am I to, post on LinkedIn and show up so that people can see me? Putting yourself out there, it can be a real barrier. So actually, I'll go ahead and let you keep talking because you're more interesting. But that in itself, I think, is maybe not the advice, but a real eye opener for me. What is kind of a piece of advice or something you've learned that you would want to tell others who are needing more connection, looking to build more connection, or maybe they're connectors
Oh,
like you are?
I love this question. So, first of all, I have to say that I love the fact that this show is called The Joy of Connecting. It's not called The Joy of Networking. I think networking is such a not a dirty word, but it's a tainted word at this point in society,
I've got to pause you. The way I've been framing it is as soon as you say network, it is kind of like ick.
right?
When I need to use that word, I always say building your
I
network
like that.
because building your network feels good.
Ugh,
Networking,
yeah,
ugh,
cringy.
no.
So, from a connection perspective, my advice to anyone, and 18 months ago, 3 years ago, I wish I could go back a decade and tell myself this, but
Mm.
connection is not a credit card swipe. It's not that sort of transaction. It's an investment. You don't go into it looking for that immediate gratification. I'm going into a store, swipe, I got this beautiful new sweater. Yay, I'm going to wear it tomorrow. You may not even know you don't need anything today. The best time to connect with people is genuinely when you have no agenda. It's just you look like an interesting human. Would you like to grab a
Yeah.
coffee, virtual or in person? And the worst thing that happens is somebody either doesn't respond, which you don't know why they didn't respond. Maybe you went to their spam, maybe they're too busy, they're whatever it is, or you get a no thank you. Those are your worst case scenarios here. So my advice is think of connecting like an investment. You're investing and you don't know what the returns are. There may be no returns, but the return, I guess, is the joy. Want to bring it back to the joy of connecting. That should be your goal.
I've got to ask then, how are you hoping to see that kind of manifest for what you're building? That joy, that aha moment, that excellence.
For me, I think, and I love technology. Again, work at a tech company, use technology
Yeah.
all the time. It's fabulous. Our technology overlords love them. I'm a loyal servant. But at the same time, there is this whole world out there, and the joy of getting to experience it and being able to facilitate actually being in it. That's what I'm hoping people get from this. It is so easy, and I fall into this
Mm.
trap. I'm in. I need to tell myself the things I say. I need to stand in front of a mirror, but it's so easy on a Saturday morning for me to say, okay, I need to do the laundry and my husband's doing whatever and we're playing with the kids in the playroom. We can get outside and go to the playground. There is this whole world out there. So if a quote unquote play date can be a forcing function for getting people to experience life a little bit more outside of the four walls that contain them, that is success. That is what I am hoping for.
That is, yeah, put that on the metrics for success
That's the
sheet, right?
KPI.
That's the KPI. We're all driving towards people getting in the world and talking to each other. I love it. It's so, I mean, it's so true. That's what's always interesting to me about this show is we end up talking about a lot of the fundamental truths, right? It's people going about doing different things with their lives and their day, but it comes back to those fundamental truths. So that's so well said. One thing I always like to ask my guests too is, as you know, you are someone who thinks deeply about connection, specifically, with your focus now, but in general, when we first connected, it was very much that, hey, you seem cool, I seem cool. There's no transaction. Let's just get to know each other. We found those bits that kind of pulled us to be really interested in what each other were working on. Who is another person that inspires you? That is like a connector that has shown you a good way of being, a good way of kind of bringing this advice that you just shared with us?
So her name is Clara Ma, and she is the founder of an incredible company called Ask a Chief of Staff. So every principal, every leader should have a chief of staff, I believe is their motto. I hope I'm not butchering that, but she is an amazing example of what it means to be a connector. She's authentic. She helps without asking. I think she helps without thinking about asking. Just for her, it's her next sense. It's just an extension of who she is. And I met her through a networking group. Again, that evil word there. I had been following her work actually since she started Ask a Chief of Staff, and I had seen her on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, that person seems really cool. And then our paths happened to cross in this group when I had originally founded Beacon, and I had reached out kind of like, hey, would you like to have a conversation? And eventually, we had multiple conversations. We text and whatnot, and just seeing her genuine joy for being that connective tissue and how she gives so freely and the way she shows up on LinkedIn. And she is just such a gracious example of what it means to be a connector and a leader in that space. If you're not following her on LinkedIn,
Yeah,
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely going to drop that in the show notes for everyone who's listening. And what's interesting too is, again, you can take the idea of connection and extend it to all. I imagine too, the one thing that chief of staffs do so well is they make the connections where they need to happen. They get the right person in the room. And so it's interesting that, what she's built is kind of to a certain extent built around that as well. There is just a connective type of person. And it's really interesting because they can exist in so many different professions and in so many different spaces.
Well, when we talk about AI, I know this is going completely in a different direction, but with the rise of AI, things are changing so rapidly, and there are certain things that are becoming even more important to double down on. And learning about connecting and actually investing in connections and those quote unquote soft skills, the ability to have a conversation, the ability to communicate in different ways. And maybe that's amplified by different AI tools, but that's just, I think it's becoming even that much more important.
You're right. Quite a few of the trends we've seen, by their nature make us feel less connected, but that backlash the other one that came to mind was just, the pandemic and Zoom, right? We all felt less connected. And so then all of a sudden now we're trying much, much harder to connect, A, over Zoom, and then B, we're kind of now desperately looking for ways to get back to the real world as well. I don't know how long we have to say we're in a post-pandemic world, but
I think we're good for 20 years on that.
Until we hit the next one, I guess.
Please don't say that. Please don't say that.
All right.
Throw some salt over your shoulder or whatever you need to do.
Yeah, I got some wood. I'll knock on that. These shows are short, but I think you've given our audience so much to think about. I would love to make sure that you get the chance to share where they can find out more from you and about Beacon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, please, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, that is my primary platform that I use. I talk a lot about working parents and topics that are of concern. Maternal mental health is another big one, which is part of my founding story, like I mentioned earlier, and also Beacon's LinkedIn page. So we'll be posting more in the coming months about our launch and ways to connect. So I'm not saying this just because I happen to work at LinkedIn, although it's a fabulous platform. And if you're not leveraging it, you absolutely should. But you can find me and Beacon there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm very excited to see the launch of Beacon. Thank you today for letting us dive into that a little bit more. And I know you and I will be talking again soon because I love what you're working on and I love your approach to connection and just being human in a world that needs it very badly.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for being here.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review to help us reach more listeners. Have a story of your own to share or know someone who should be on the show? Visit www.joyofconnect.ing and let us know. Now go send a short message to someone you've been meaning to connect with. You never know where it might lead.